All right. So before we get started, Jeremy, I just wanted to give a little bit of an update so folks are can expect know what to expect. Let's put it that
Sure.
way. So as I mentioned before, I was recording these podcasts with Eddie, and we had a great run, and then Eddie had bigger and better things to do in life, so he said, see you later. Having said that, he's still obviously here with us in spirit, and so the hope was that I will continue the podcast now. So I recorded the last episode of the Republic, which I just wanted to finish it, and then I kept asking myself, should I record more? What should I do? And then I said, you know what, I like reading, and so I'm going to continue to read. And then since I'm reading, I'll record. So I went ahead and recorded the Nicomachean Ethics. I started book one, and I didn't enjoy the experience as much as I thought I would. That's simply because we had said this before. Eddie and we were influenced by Mortimer Adler, and one of the things Mortimer says is that reading alone is like drinking alone.
Mhm.
So it's not as much fun,
Right.
essentially. And so I was like, yeah, I need to reach out to other buddies of mine, people I know who think the same way. And the first person who came to mind was you. We've had some very deep conversations, Jeremy, and so as the podcast goes along, I really hope that we are able to recreate what I was able to create or Eddie and I were able to create, and we can recreate it. I have no doubts we'll be able to do it. You're a deep thinker, just like Eddie is. You're a brilliant human being, and you're beautiful. You have been through life, and you have gained wisdom just by being knocked around by it, just like Eddie and me, and most people who are listening to this. And so, I'm really excited. And so what we have done here now is we've decided that despite me having recorded the book one, we are going to record it again, the bigger, better, beautiful version of it. Uh, and so that's the attempt here. So I'm not going to say anything more. Jeremy, if you want to just introduce yourself just a little bit, a few words, and then we can get going.
Sure. I mean, there are big shoes to fill. That I've listened to all the podcasts of you and Eddie, and it really enjoyed them. And so this is exciting and you and I have been meeting for over 2 years now, reading books on philosophy and talking about
Yep.
them. So it's really exciting for me. As a background, it's interesting. So the two of you are medical doctors. I have a PhD in psychology with a focus on executive development and adult development. And so it actually, I think, fits really nicely into the conversations we're about to have. The application of what this means for us today, and how philosophy and thinking thousands of years ago still have application today, and in some ways hasn't changed. We're seeing a
Right.
lot of commonality, and so there's a lot to talk about. I'm really excited to kind of join in, and I am no expert in philosophy, so I'll say that going in and knowing that we're going to talk through it, and it's and I'm excited for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the pursuit of wisdom. It's the love of knowledge, and pursuit of wisdom, and there is really no being an expert in it.
Right.
This is not armchair philosophy, right? This is about reading someone's words and figuring out, does it apply to your life? And the good part about this is, you can read someone like Plato and see if you agree with Plato or not. I mean, it's almost like you're having a conversation with Plato, as we did through the Republic. And you come to realize that there's a reason why these books have stood the test of time. It's because you can come up with an argument. And I have, like, I used to read a chapter and I used to be like, I have this question and I'm sure that he doesn't have an answer to it. And then right then, the next chapter, there will be an answer to the exact question that I asked. And, and you do it a few times and then you realize that, okay, he's thought of everything. And there's a reason why that this has withstood the test of time. Written more than 2000 years ago, still speaks to me like it was written yesterday. It's because I believe that the human condition remains the same. You could dress it up many different ways. We are driving faster cars, or we are living in a place where we don't have to worry about infections. But as long as we have mortality and this temporariness of life, the human condition remains the same. And I think that's the reason why these concepts, especially in the philosophy of ethics, it doesn't change. You still have to know how to deal with your neighbor, with yourself, in a manner that is compressed in time. It's just like a second, or just like a very minuscule time point in the eternity of what is the universe. And how do you contend with that as a being that is rational? And so the questions, if one sits and asks oneself the questions are the same.
Right.
Am I doing the right thing? Am I a good person? What does it mean to be happy? And it turns out that there is there is no there is no new wisdom. There's ancient wisdom, and then there is modern knowledge. But whatever we are doing right now, the faster way to get from one place to another, a better smartphone, artificial intelligence, it still doesn't answer the question of wisdom. The wisdom comes through experience. It comes through time. It comes through 2,000 years of talking and being and acting as a human being. That's all compressed in these pages. So
That's right.
I underscore your point.
Yes.
It's relevant, and it will continue to remain so as long as we remain organic beings that have mortality and have a timestamp.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, exactly. We might be dealing with more complexity now, but at the end of the day, humans are still humans.
Absolutely.
Still struggling with the same questions. Yep.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I would say that some of the complexity is probably taken away. We've made our life simpler now.
Yep.
Because when back in the day when these books were being written, when Aristotle was writing, and before that Plato was writing, the person who would participate in discourse like this probably participated in war, had both on the receiving end or on the business end of committing acts of violence,
Mm-hmm.
and that adds a whole nother layer to what it is to be human. And they lived at times where the impact of nature, the impact of disease, and all of that was so much higher. And so folks were lives were cut short very, very early, and they could see a lot of death and in their loved ones. So in that way, their lives were complex. Yes, our lives are complex because I think we're doing multiple things in multiple different domains.
Mm-hmm.
But inside of each of those domains of what it is to be a human, we have made our lives so much simpler, right? And it still hasn't helped us be any happier. Like, we are happier in the sense from a pleasure standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not happier from the standpoint of being better humans. I don't believe that's the case. It's still a struggle. It's in me. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one. I don't think so.
No, I think we're all struggling to figure out what is happiness, right? And
Right.
yeah.
And therein underscores the Nicomachean ethics. I think the first chapter, it's almost like there is no pulling of punches, right? You enter into the ring with Aristotle. The bell goes ding ding, and he is just whacking you over the head with, have you asked yourself these questions, man? And very quickly, right? In a couple of pages, it's like, what's happening. So, and I think we've discussed this. Like, my journey, I found myself asking myself that question very early on. I asked myself, very early on in my journey, later in my life, but early in my journey, like, how is it that I can't answer what it is to be happy? How do you define happiness? So what do you think about that? Have you ever had that kind of a conversation with yourself?
Yeah, I have over the years, and I think actually at a young age, trying to understand happiness by looking at how people spend their time and doing various odd jobs growing up,
Yeah.
from cleaning and repairing Oriental rugs to hosting in restaurants to even being a newspaper boy, at 13 years old. But and being miserable, by the way, at it. But to look at that and say, all right, well, you spend the majority of your life working and doing something, producing something, helping someone or people or groups, and and what motivates these people to actually get excited or to experience happiness. And I think as we get into the Nicomachean ethics here in chapter one, it's not a moment to moment thing, right? So we're not talking about happiness as right now. I'm happy because I'm on a Zoom with you talking philosophy, but it's actually looking at like the longevity of over time, that's where we actually get into happiness. But I was fascinated that, people spend their entire lives. I would work in a psychiatric hospital, and I was there for a year. I knew I was there for a year. And so I was coming in, and I was like, all right, well, let's observe. These people are there. This is their career, right?
Right.
The mental health technician, the psychiatrists, the nurses, the admins, they
Yeah.
spend their life in this hospital. How does that lead to, like, what is fulfilling for them? If you ask them, they would all potentially have some answers for you. Not everyone, right? But it might be that they actually feel like they are providing some sort of purpose, or they're not happy, right? Right, and the job isn't necessarily going to lead to happiness, right? It's deeper than that. It's more complex than that.
Right.
You know?
Right. And that's the key of of first, that's the key to the first door of understanding that it's a lot more complex than if I eat something that tastes good, it makes me happy. But if I keep eating that thing every single day, or worse yet, there's somebody who ties me to a chair and stuffs my face with the thing that I like to eat, like very quickly, the thing that was pleasurable and made me happy is quickly going to become the pinnacle of my pain and my distress. And so pleasure in and of itself is not happiness.
Right.
I mean, many a rock stars will agree with that,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so we I think what we could do here is we probably start at the top and we can get as deep as we can get in this chapter, right? I know happiness features very predominantly in this, but there's some other very nice 1-2 punches that he delivers as well. Just a thing that I wanted to underscore was he named this the Nicomachean ethics, Nicomachus being his son. And so it turns out that, even of all the things that he wrote, Aristotle is like the father of thought. All the modern thinking all comes from him. The most important thing that he could name, he named after his son in a way. So this is important to him as well. And the other thing here is that unlike the Republic, which is a dialogue between Socrates and his interlocutors, who are his followers in a way, it lends itself to many allegories. The Republic does. It's a conversation. It's very rich and deep, and you can get into each page and really get nuggets out of it. And you have to, as you know, you kind of have to mine for it. If you're not careful, it's and do a very superficial read. You can come away with the themes that people usually do, saying that the Republic was written for people to run city states, when in fact it is a manual for cultivating your rational principle and forming a philosophical republic inside of oneself. The Nicomachean Ethics is more of a lecture series. These are series of lectures that Aristotle delivered to the nobility, and these were princes. So Aristotle was the tutor for Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great, unlike Socrates, is not great for the way he thought, and he was great for what he did. In the sense, greatness goes both ways. It's not necessarily good or bad acts, and so the thing to remember here is if one is not careful, one can look at the lectures of Aristotle and not practice what is written down here, and still end up committing acts that are not necessarily in line with what he talks about here. But these are lectures, and so it lends itself more to, how do I say? There's not that much allegory in here.
Right.
It's really on the nose, really.
Very straightforward.
Very straightforward, and
Yeah.
so yeah. So what we can do here is we could read and say we can probably agree or disagree, and then we can probably have a discussion of whether we can have examples in our lives which either make or break the case of whether we agree or disagree.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So we started off. I guess the first he lays down a few ground rules. I don't know if you got a sense of that as you were going through it. There were some ground rules that he lays down. He said, if you're going to read this, I expect you to do a few things. Did you get a sense of that?
You know what? I didn't. Why don't you?
Okay.
Yeah, tell me more.
And also, in your defense, I've actually read these a few times, so I kind of come back to it. That there's this order in what he does. So what he does is he says, so one of the things I have found is like when we have kind of discussions regarding especially ethics, there's a lot of opinion, and it's very hard to have discussions in the middle. You have to pick an extreme. And the problem with picking an extreme then is that it doesn't lend itself to good argument, good discussion. It usually lends itself to fistfights if you're not careful.
Right.
And
Right.
so Aristotle says, but from the very get go, that uh, wisdom is needed to participate in this. And the wisdom, what it does is it allows you to seek only as much precision as you can find in that conversation, not any more, not any less. So once you come to a point in the conversation where you find that further precision is not really getting you to the same goal, or is distracting you from the goal, step away. And he does that a few times. Like if you notice during in the reading of it, he says, enough of these topics, let's move on.
Right.
Right. That is his way of saying there's no more precision here. Let's move on. Doesn't let
Mm-hmm.
so. That's one thing that he does. The second thing that he does is he lays out ground rules saying that who is this targeted to? Who is his ideal student? Says there are those who know, and then there are those who are ignorant but are willing to learn. And then those are those who are ignorant and are unwilling to learn. It says the worst is the third group. You don't want to be in that one, right? The best is the first group, which you are not in. So you are in that second group now. And so can you can you find yourself in that group? And if you do, then great. Then these lectures are for you. And the third thing I found that he says, which I have which if I were to pick these books up when I was younger, it probably would have made less of an impact on me, simply because he says that you have to have gone through life and been and been buffeted around by the winds of life to gain certain aspects of wisdom that comes with doing that. There's some practical wisdom that you gain in order to be able to answer these questions. If you've not had the experiences, you will not be able to understand what is at stake here. And so, if one is young in mind, not necessarily age, because one could be young in age and still have had the experience. Young in mind, it's not for them. And so, I think we are perfectly placed for this. We've been bonked around the head a few times by life, and so we've learned a few things, and that it lends itself to that conversation. So that's the prelude for starting. What do you think about that?
Well, so actually, it jogged my memory, and then I do remember it. And I actually wrote some notes around um, there's a story, and I'm going to butcher it, so I'm not going to go into the whole thing. But it's a Passover story, for which is a Jewish holiday, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's about the four questions, and there are four sons, and there's like the curious, the simple, the not so wise, that thinks they know everything. And so it kind of actually rang true in terms of, well, there's a relation, similar kind of concept there,
Uh-huh.
in terms of who's ready and willing and able to do this. And I was thinking also, in terms of, and you'll probably hear me say this a lot, but conventional and post-conventional thinking. And I think that the student of this conversation can be both, conventional or post-conventional, as long as they're curious, and open to it. And I think that there's levels of conventional thinking that's not right. And I think,
Right.
and we can talk about that, sometime, of, where we talk about like vertical development and where people are in terms of
Yeah.
their own evolution, right?
Yeah, but I think this is a good point for you to introduce vertical development here just a little bit, right? So that folks will get a little familiar. So what do you mean by vertical? And then where is in that vertical development, where are the folks who, according to Aristotle, would be the ideal student? Because there are ones that are not, and then there are those who know that are not a student, they're master, right? So where would that be? What do you believe on the vertical development? Where would they be?
Sure. So vertical development is really like, it's it's the belief that, as humans we evolve over time, right? Just like Socrates believes, in terms of like wisdom, and talking to someone who's older than him, he would think that that person has some wisdom because of age and experience, right?
Right.
Is that accurate? That's
That's correct. Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's used often and looked at more in the function of like work life. But the reality is, it's how we think about the world. It's what our perspective is.
Hmm.
It's a shift from I'm really thinking about myself, and maybe almost like a fight or flight type mode where you're starting kind of like, you're very short term in your thinking. Your mindset is really immediate needs, versus then you move into still self-serving, but you're kind of like prioritizing, group think and how people like, I'm not going to go against the grain here. So these people aren't necessarily ready for this conversation. Those are, we call those the opportunists and the diplomats. As you kind of expand your perspective and you grow wiser and you have more experiences, you're moving into still conventional thinking, but it's called, we call them the experts and the achievers, which are two different kind of, I wouldn't say levels. They're just, growth areas. The experts more kind of rational judgment, but they're starting to see that like I can't do this on my own. They're starting to see that the impact that I have, if I'm gonna, if I'm not just with you, like I understand the impact of my actions, right? And the achiever is looking at kind of the larger outcomes, greater responsibility. They have a further kind of, they understand that they can focus on something now that will benefit them or others in a year,
Mm.
maybe 18 months,
Mm.
maybe not beyond that, but they can start to have questions, and they can be curious, and they're at the right kind of point where you can start to really challenge their thinking.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe they're not open to it at first, but I think that with experience that comes more. And then you get into post conventional, which is what we call like redefining and then transformation. And that's where people are curious. They question the rules and challenge assumptions. Um, they have more of a longevity in terms of the things that I do now could impact me 2, 3 years from now. The transformer is someone who really looks at long-term benefits of the world and like the actions that we do now.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
that going to do
Yeah.
5, 10 years from now?
Yeah.
If I'm not recycling today, what's that going to do for my children and my children's children? And so that's kind of like conventional and post-conventional thinking. And does that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So which is so the lower well the earlier stages here, I should say lower high because these are all just stages of being, right? But you can when you say humans evolve over time, this is not evolution from the standpoint of like Cro-Magnon man
That's
and
correct. Right.
yeah. This is more inside of a human's life during their life. The early childhood development stages where everybody's very well known, very well aware of. And then what folks believe, and in my experience, is once you become an adult, suddenly everybody expects that now they're not going to change anymore. Whatever you have thought, whatever you have ideas wise, stay with you till you die. And it turns out that's not the case. Even as the prefrontal cortex really rewires itself and develops all that by the age of 25, you really start thinking in different domains. And then each stage of life, you actually change and morph and develop. And if you're lucky, you are wiser with each passing decade. Now, you'll always find examples of 65-year-olds and 70-year-olds behaving like they're 30-year-olds, and that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
But the right way to step through life is that you're breaking through these levels that you didn't even know existed.
Right.
You believe the way you think right now is the way to think, and I've gained all this wisdom. I'm here now. I know, and then suddenly one day you come upon this secret layer, and you're like, whoa, what's this?
Right.
And that curiosity, after a while you come to realize that is in fact development, and you're looking for that. You're looking for the next level. You're not satisfied where you are, or you're not trying to build constructs around you to justify the way you think. And I feel that all of us have probably done that at some point, where we have tried, we come to a way of thinking, and then we try to create constructs around us to buffer that thinking or to hold it up. and it all comes crumbling down, and one has a moment of crisis when one realizes all these things you built around yourself, be it on, be it a title, be it a zip code, be it a spouse, be it or whatever, all of these things, they break down. And that's when you start questioning yourself as to, what is in fact, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be uh, happy? And that curiosity gets you asking questions. And then here we are, on a Sunday evening asking ourselves, what does Aristotle have to say about it? So so that I see what you mean by you come to that middle level where you're in that achiever mindset, where these things are probably crumbling around you, and then you go into this post conventional, and it's not a voluntary act. It just so happens that you find yourself there sometimes, but sometimes you can be pulled into it as well, especially if you're curious about it. And reading something like this or participating in a conversation like this could probably be that catalyst that pushes you into that post conventional space.
That's right. So it's once you're there, it doesn't mean I've arrived and now I'm here for good. There's fallback, right? We all fall back, and depending on what environment you're in, you can fall way back, right? And so it's very much fluid, and I think the big piece here, and I think it plays so well into the Republic and the Nicomachean ethics here, is the ability to reflect, right? The idea of like, who's the wise man, which we won't, we could talk an hour or days on that. The one who's, those who say I'm not the wise man, how do I know that I'm the wise man, right? The ability to reflect on, what's going on in my world and what's going on in your world, and then what's going on in our world together, allows you to find yourself in post-conventional thinking, and gets you there over time, right? And yeah.
My kids are going back and forth through the front door, so keep banging the background. If you hear it,
I don't hear it.
You don't. Okay, good. I'm glad. So then maybe it's not going to get captured. But anyways, so coming back to the Nicomachean ethics, then so he starts with saying, okay, these are all the folks who should participate, and then he moves on to saying, why do we do things? Why do we act? And that is, at the end of the day, philosophy is not about really armchair philosophy. You're not sitting on a chair and asking yourself these questions. You're acting in the world, and one should be asking oneself what those actions are. Or a different way to look at it is, everything that we do for a certain reason. There's an end to the action. Now there are certain actions that we do that lead to other actions, and those actions lead to other actions. But the end of all of those actions, if we were to sit and think back from it, we find that those ends, sometimes all of these actions will start kind of curving to one end, the end of all ends, is a way to think about it. And each step now, each action or each activity can also be an action that lead to another activity, which is an end, which then can lead to another activity that's also an end, which can then lead to an end. But that is a logical derivation of figuring out how one plans one's life. One can be aimlessly just walking down a path and not have any goal. But even that person, if they were to sit down and ask themselves why they're doing what they're doing, they would realize that there's a reason for it. Just that whatever their reason is, they haven't really given it as much thought. But once they do, it turns out the aimless wanderer and the really directed individual have similar ends, and it may so turn out that they actually have the same end. So then if that is the case, then each of the activities that you're doing to get to that end take a subordinate role to the end, the universal end. So I wanted to see if you have any thoughts on I see around myself a lot of folks who get distracted along the way, where they think that the end that they are seeking is the end in and of itself, or they get distracted. They actually have a big, hairy, audacious goal at the end that they were trying to go for. But along the way, they find that there are these activities that they have to do to get there, and then they get distracted, and then they find another goal which was in the path, even though it is subordinate to the big, hairy, audacious goal, they end up satisfied in that space and they say, well, this is what I was searching for. Have you had that experience or
I mean, it's interesting because I was actually going to go a different route with that, which is, let's say you reach that big hairy goal. Are you satisfied then?
mm-hmm.
Or is it what's next? Is it
Right?
to
Okay.
your point? The end is so you reach the end, and then it goes to some another end, right? So it's continuous, right? So you don't. I guess I would say I don't know if I've ever reached. Of course we all reach goals and have accomplishments, and but what are those? What is the result of that? Like the result of that isn't I have arrived. I'm satisfied.
Right.
And maybe for some it is though. Maybe it is the wanderer. Maybe it's I choose to wander into for the next 6 months. I'm going in this direction. I'm going east, and eventually I've arrived somewhere, and I've decided that this is it. I've arrived, and I'm satisfied with where I'm at. And
Right.
then what about tomorrow?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So to your point, there are goals that we set for ourselves, and they become all-consuming goals. Like, and I could say for myself, it was getting into medical school. You get into medical school, the end of all ends in your mind as you're doing it. But once you get in, you realize the day you walk in, you realize that that goal is behind you now.
Right.
So that
That
was
was only
not
the
the end of all.
beginning. Yeah, that was only the beginning. Yeah.
That's right. That was an activity that you did to word this other activity.
Yeah.
And so the end of all ends is may not be something that you reach, but it's something that you walk toward, like the wanderer. You
Mhm.
keep aiming in that direction. But I do find that folks step off that path. So to give an example, which may seem like a very lowbrow example, but uh, so say there's an organization that wants to solve for poverty in Africa, and they start on that goal, but somewhere along the way they have to fundraise enough to get there, right? And then there are certain activities that they have to do to fundraise, and then those activities and those connections and the fundraising ends up becoming the goal, and one can raise a lot of money and still not achieve what is meant to be achieved because the process then becomes its own beast. It becomes a goal in of itself. Like once you take the money and you go someplace and you deposit that money and you create whatever you set out to create, what do you do next?
Mhm.
Right? Uh, and so they end up getting it. So because the question is, you can never raise enough funds to solve for the problem of poverty in Africa. So then it becomes a problem about raising funds as opposed to actually doing the good. Now, this
Sure.
is a lowbrow example. Um,
But if you spend your life with the intent of doing that,
yeah, I still live a life.
at the end of your life, you haven't arrived, but you're in acts of intentionally of purpose and good throughout the course of it with lots of little successes along the way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But the trick though is to not trick, but the real the journey, the one that would get you to that state, is if you don't take the eye off the ball.
Mhm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
At some point, I think even politicians probably start out with some good in mind, and then it gets to campaign funding.
Right.
At some point, they step away, and then the good starts looking very murky.
Yeah.
You see, I think many of the like they said, the road to hell is paved with many good intentions, right? Like that.
That's right.
And one has to be careful of that. So the end of all ends. But he says, like in Aristotle's mind, unlike Plato, where you you develop a little bit of a dichotomy. First of all, Aristotle was a student of Plato who then left the academy and famously criticized Plato a lot. He took a step away in the opposite direction. I think the reason was Plato did not choose him to lead the academy as a successor. So he felt slighted by that. And by the way, here's the other thing about both. So both Plato and Aristotle were academicians. They were philosophers, but not in the same way as Socrates was.
Right.
You see, Socrates walked the walk and talked the talk. And, if there's somebody that you and me should be looking at as an example or paragon, it has to be Socrates, not necessarily Aristotle. I mean, they were as human as you and me. But the other thing about it is they were as human as you and me. So, we get to see what it looks like. They're not some, a being like Socrates who is very hard to emulate. But he says that according to Plato, the end of all ends was this ideal human, like the pinnacle of it, which is Socratic, is the philosophical constitution. It's an individual pursuit of excellence. It's the Ubermensch of what's the philosopher's name? I'll come to me. But so that's the Superman, So Nietzsche's Ubermensch is Superman. It's like that, right? Now, but for Aristotle, he was a lot more practical. For him, the end of all ends was politics. He felt that yes, you could build inside of you this perfect human, right? The philosopher king, but wouldn't it be better if you could do the same for a city state? So then it becomes the city state, then becomes the ultimate aim, happiness of the city. And that is where one starts like falling into these traps, because happiness for a city state is very hard to develop because there's so many different opinions around it, right? And it's hard to do. And so then that's where rhetoric comes in. That's where, where you're talking both sides of your mouth and all of that, right? To keep everybody happy. But he also agrees, though, like Plato, just, there's certain truths that you cannot step away from. One of the things he says is that there are three ways of living. And I think this actually lends itself really well to the vertical development here. Just bear with me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. But there's a life of pleasure, there's a life of politics or honor, and then there's a life of wisdom or knowledge. And so, as you can imagine, if you're in the earlier stages of development, it's more about pleasure. It's more about the individual accomplishments and the things that you can get, the accoutrements of life.
Yes.
Then it becomes about honor, where you're expecting to get someone of the width that you believe is honorable to tell you that you're honorable. Mm-hmm. And then the third then is the pursuit of wisdom or knowledge. And so he does agree that the contemplative life supersedes that of the political or the honor-seeking life. But he does agree that politics trumps the other forms of ends, the ends in and of itself. I don't know what you thought of that.
Yeah, well, one, I think it's an excellent example of vertical, right? And two, I was going to ask you, do you agree with that? What are your thoughts on
that,
his view there?
Yeah. So I would say that I can say from my own personal example that holds true. Mm-hmm. However, and also, like what you just said, right? That these stages are not stages that you inhabit, and you don't inhabit the other stages. Even when I'm in the pursuit of wisdom, I would like to call myself like a pursuit of wisdom, I'm still worried about pleasures. Like I do want to have a full belly, and I do want to be able to have I want to have the accoutrements of life. I don't want to live in privation. Right. And I also want to be considered to be somebody who is a good human being. Right. Like so Aristotle, so in the Republic, Socrates says that a just man would be happy even if the entire world considers him to be unjust, but he's in fact just inside. Mm-hmm. Right. But at the end of the Republic, he says, I created this argument just to show that even if the world considers the person unjust, the person would still be happy. But let's try not to think on those lines. Let's give me back what you owe me. That the just man will be considered just by people around him, and so will also have that double happiness. And I'm hoping that is true, because I don't want to live in privation and be just for it. everybody cannot be Nelson Mandela or Mahatma Gandhi. You know what I mean? Like we have to. I want certain good things. So I do believe that I carry all three stages with me.
Yes.
What do
Yes.
you think?
I think it's rare that someone can give up all personal pleasures and drive and striving for more and better. Maybe partially of that, part of that is the society in which we live in, and
Right.
where we have the choice to do that, and part of that could be our, the privilege that we potentially have, that allows us to do that, right? But Socrates made a choice.
He did make a choice.
Mahatma Gandhi made a choice. That
Yep.
was, and to truly get there where they were, I think it's a lot for any person to truly come to terms with, right?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, and there's plenty of examples of folks who are put on a pedestal like that, who maybe, are just human like the rest of us and have their
Yeah.
personal pleasures, and their, tower comes crumbling down at some point because
Yeah.
we expected better of them, and
Yeah.
they're just like you and me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Which again, we shouldn't fault them for it, right? Like I
Right.
do agree that you need to have that clean a nose in order to participate in politics? I don't know. If you haven't lived and loved and aired as a human being, do you have the ability to make those decisions?
Mhm.
That humanize you. Even Nelson Mandela made personal decisions with you know people in his lives that that he was not proud of.
Right.
And so on and so forth. And he had his political enemies and so on and so forth. So did Mahatma Gandhi. There are a lot of things, that. So these are things that do humanize him. But you're right. At some point, they did make a choice to forgo, the things of comfort to take that next step. So there are levels to this. There
Right.
are levels to this, right? And then
Right.
and that's right. And you can imagine. You really hope that if one is at if there are levels to this and someone is at that level, you hope that their happiness is of a finer quality, of a better quality, of better essence than someone who's not at that level,
Mhm.
right? So then, even in that, the end of all ends, or the achievement of it, or the state that you are in, that state has a different quality. The more you put into it. Despite his privations, Nelson Mandela was probably towards the end of his life a happier man than I can choose to be. If I so that's what I meant to say. I don't know if that's true or not. I'll find out as time goes on.
Yeah.
You can never know. And honestly, I don't know what was going on in Nelson Mandela's mind when he passed. But I have to say that the fact that he chose to step away from power,
Mhm.
right, in a democratic fashion, goes to show that he had equanimity within.
Yes.
He was a philosophical king, the philosopher king inside.
Yeah.
Very few people have stepped away from power like that.
Right. Right. It's my understanding, and I could be wrong here, but I was in the Netherlands a few years ago, and getting a tour with a gentleman who had lived there for many years, and he was explaining to me how politicians are there for 2 years to do their job, and then they're done.
Huh.
And in that sense, if that works, you're there for the greater good.
Right.
You go in with a purpose,
Yeah.
and he was very clear: if they don't work for the people, they're out, just like
Huh.
that.
Huh.
They're only there for 2 years. I don't know how I don't know how much of that's accurate,
I don't know either.
it's interesting. It's an interesting thought of, if that's the greater good, right? If that's what we're
Yeah.
working towards, of politics being that,
Yeah.
thinking about how can we lead, a city to happiness. Um,
Yeah.
there are probably systems out there that exist that actually still focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah. But see, that is a law that this is a great point. It's a good segue to this, right? So So he talks about this. He talks about uh, so the end of all ends. What is that end? Is that it? So he's saying that, which I believe is the case, that whatever we desire as the end of our action is in our mind a good thing to have. And in these goods, all these good things to have, there is a hierarchy similar to the hierarchy that exists in humans, where there are pleasure seeking, honor seeking, and wisdom seeking, where these goods are in the same level. So a cake that tastes great is a good, but it's not the same as a degree in psychology or things like that. So so there are goods that surpass other goods. We say, why do you want to eat a cake? Well, because cake tastes good. Why do you want to eat things that taste good? Because, well, it makes me feel good. And why do you want to, why do you want to feel good? Because it makes me happy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, happiness is a term that we use in the English language. It's a very practical language, and really there isn't there are not that many ways to have happiness. So I'm sure there's a word in your mind and my mind for happiness that comes with eating good food, which is different from happiness that comes with watching your favorite team win. But at the end of the day, we use the same word for it. It's the same kind of feeling, right? Happiness. Mm-hmm. And so the end of all the whys, why we do certain things, we keep following the chain, we keep asking ourselves, we will all come to some form of what is of happiness. Now, but what he's trying to say is that there's only that much cake that you can eat before you get to happiness. Right? If you keep stuffing your mouth with cake, the example that I gave, someone ties you to a chair and keeps stuffing your mouth with cake, like you go from pleasure to pain very quickly. And the same thing is true of other things like honor and money as well. The more you're seeking honor for it, not for anything else, but for its own sake, the more you start doing things that could eventually come and will probably bite you in the behind. Like this is what happens for people who stray from the path, because there are acts that you do because they lead to a good, or acts that you do because you want to get something out of it. And if you're trying to get something out of it, you're stepping away from the good. So similarly, wealth, too much of wealth creates problems, right? It's just like more money, more problems, right? I think was that Biggie Smalls. I don't know who said it, but
yeah, I think so.
and it turns out to be true. And then seeking wealth for itself, right? As wealth being the good, I do everything I do so that I make more money. That is also straying away from the path of good. But doing all of these things so that you are actually achieving a certain state of being, which he uses the word soul, which comes SOU, soul that comes from the Republic, which I don't know what is the Greek translation for it, but I don't believe that they're talking about soul in the sense the way we in common parlance talk about soul. I think what they're talking about is this state of mind that is in pursuit of the next biggest thing that you identify with. That is your mind. You as Jeremy, me as Anish. There's a purification of that essence in our brains that says this is Anish and this is Jeremy, and that is the highest order of those group of neurons is the soul, right? Mm-hmm. That is actually anatomized, individualized to you and me, and it's in our minds. And when we say I am a good person, what we are saying is that epitomized part of our neuronal cluster that identifies as you or me is a good person, and that is the soul. So it says and that soul can be a soul that is enslaved to passion or enslaved to honor, or it could be in the pursuit of wisdom. If it is in the pursuit of wisdom, it is the contemplative soul, and the actions of that soul, if and the goods that it is trying to achieve, and the happiness that it is trying to achieve is of a higher magnitude than the soul that is in the pursuit of eating the next best tasting cake.
Right.
So, what do you think about that?
Well, I think so. My understanding of that is it's all about balancing extremes. There's, too much of anything isn't a good thing, right? And
Absolutely.
so, I think there are real world examples of that. I know that there's an article a few years ago that came out, and I know that this has changed probably dramatically in the last 6 years. But it basically said that those who earn X amount of money a year are found to be the happiest. They have what they need. They feel like they have purpose, but they're not struggling financially. But they're also not, extremely wealthy. And it was actually like it was under 100,000 a year at the time. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that that's old. But the reality of like somewhere in the middle there is where people find happiness. Um, and in this idea of the soul, I think one of the concepts I love that I thought really plays out here in this chapter in book one is this idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, which
Hmm.
it's pretty funny that these are concepts of bestseller airport books these days. Same stuff, just different wording, right?
Absolutely.
But the extrinsic motivators, which could be a lot of cake or money or bonus, or these little things are short lived. They bring joy or happiness, however how we determine how to define happiness, right? But they're short lived. But you still need those. You need those in kind
Yeah.
of the bigger picture of building a path of happiness in your um, but then you also need that intrinsic motivation, which is really what drives people at work, which is having a purpose, understanding the why, knowing what you're doing and what path you're on, having it defined in some way so that you know that you're providing some type of value to yourself or others in the world around you. Um, so that was where I was thinking when when you start talking about these extremes of having too much or having too little. Yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I see what you mean by, I think this is about carrying all of those things together. But in order to synthesize what happiness would be, it is important to note that there is a difference in the happiness that one would get from something like an external motivator than one would get from an internal motivator.
Right.
And that if there is a happiness that you get from an internal motivator, that if you add eating a cake while discussing philosophy and it makes you a bit happier, well, it turns out that that is not the happiness that you got from discussing philosophy is not the be all end all. Essentially, what it means to say is that if there is a certain amount of happiness, and now we have to start talking, trying to get precise without trying to get too precise, in Aristotle's terms. Otherwise, we have lost the conversation. But he's saying that if you could think of happiness, but now you add a little bit of an external happiness to it, now it becomes more. That means that it wasn't the ultimate happiness that you were looking for. Because the ultimate happiness, the happiness with a capital H, is one in which nothing more can be added
Mm.
to make it any better. Because if you keep adding to it, then there is the next stage of it and it will go on to infinity. And we would like to believe that that is not the case, that there is a capital H happiness that one can achieve that is self-sufficient. Self-sufficient. That means it doesn't need any more to be any better.
Yeah.
Right? So it it makes for a life that is desirable and lacking in nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that means it has, like you said, this is a great point that you made. It has all the intrinsic stuff in it, plus all the extrinsic stuff in it, in such a way that you cannot add any more to it to make it any better. Now, ask yourself, that's the problem. That's the reason why Aristotle gets labeled as an elitist.
Mm.
Says, the good life is not accessible to everybody.
Right.
Because you can imagine, you can step off this path to capital H happiness because of many things that can happen to you which are not in your control. Like, just give an example: someone loses an eye, they step off that path, right? Because an addition of the eye suddenly adds to to their happiness that they can achieve. You see what I mean?
Mhm.
So now that's obviously an example, but the way Aristotle, when he talks about this capital H happiness, which again, like, I'm not saying that what he's not trying to get at the fact that capital H happiness is available for all of us. It is an aim. It's a goal that we can keep walking toward. It's you're not going to achieve it because of acts of God in his in his way of thinking. In our way of thinking, it's just again this chance, right? Things can happen that step you away, or one doesn't choose where one is born.
Right.
One could be born in a malaria swamp in Africa, and then that. Yes, can you still achieve happiness? Yes, 100% you can. But the person who was born in the lap of luxury in somewhere else, and now even that person can have a pretty painful life. So there are a lot of things that can happen that doesn't get you there, but one can step off that path very, very quickly. But yes, you're right. You need both the extrinsic and the intrinsic in a way that makes it self-sufficient. What do you think?
Yes, I absolutely agree. And in some ways, I also think that maybe happiness is easier achieved by the people who aren't thinking about it as much.
Yes, so this brings to the question of who would one rather be, a happy pig or a sad Socrates,
Right. Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Now, so the counter to what you just said is that if we agree to the first premise that there is happiness that derived from a life of pleasure, a happiness that's derived from a life of honor, and a happiness that's derived from a life of contemplation, and that the life of contemplation, the happiness of the contemplation, supersedes the happiness of honor and pleasure, then that may not necessarily be the case. I do understand what you're saying, though, that sometimes thinking about it too much can make you feel unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
So aren't you better off just eating the cake and smiling while doing it, rather than worrying about the nature of life and happiness? So that's a good question. And um,
It, yeah, and this might be another question for you too. Maybe I don't know if we have time to answer it today, but do you truly know that you've arrived at happiness at any point in time? Or are you on your deathbed and you're reflecting on your life and you end saying, I lived a happy life?
it's a fantastic question. I think it really lends itself very well to the next discussion,
Yeah.
Jeremy. That'd be a great way to actually close book one, because I think that's what he gets to as well. And I think it's an important conversation for us to have. Any final thoughts that you have?
I thought this is a lot of fun, Anisha. This is our first time, and I think we just touched on the chapter. I mean, I think in a rich conversation. So this is really I hope I hope others find it interesting as well.
I'll tell you what, the best hour I've spent in a long time. I think it's more than an hour. I don't know. I don't know how long this was, but boy, like, I've been smiling this whole time, both inside and out, man. I've absolutely loved it. The thing, Jeremy, is that the music for the podcast and all that is still from the version one of this. So just to all our viewers, yeah, I miss Eddie, and Eddie's voice is in there, but eventually we may record one for ourselves, with an introduction.
Yeah.
And we will put Jeremy's touches all over it as well. So um, looking forward to the next one. I think we can probably just continue with a little bit of this of book one, and then we can probably segue into book two. We'll discuss it through the week and decide how that goes.
Great. Yeah, let's see, stopping here.